I'm Catherine Colasanti with the Center for Regional Food Systems, and today is part 3 of our seminar series, Achieving Food System Visions, Past, Present, and Future. If you've been with us for all 3, you notice we're in our 3rd of 3 rooms, so thanks for tracking us down. And if you brave the weather, or if you are planning to brave the weather on the way back, thanks for doing that. But glad you guys are all with us here in the room and on Zoom. We're honored today to host Tom Kelly from Food Solutions New England, and I think Tom will be a great grand finale for this seminar series.
No pressure.
No pressure. But in his role as Executive Director at University of New Hampshire's Sustainability Institute, Tom helps to shepherd a food system vision for not just one state, but a network of 6 states. So he knows a lot about bringing diverse partners together. 2 quick logistical notes before we get started. We will have time at the end for questions, as with previous sessions, so be thinking of those. If you're on Zoom, use the Q&A box, and you can type those in at any point, and then we'll present those to Tom at the end. Also, we are recording today's session, and for everyone that registered, we will send out that link as soon as it's available and put that on our website. So with that, please join me in welcoming Tom Kelly.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for virtually being here. It's great to be here at Michigan State with some old friends, Rich Pirog and Mike Ham.
Long time is a better time.
Yeah, right. Mike made a special flight overnight to be here, so and then also some medium-term friend, Nessa, who's here, who we were working together in New England and had a conversation on an island in Boston Harbor that partially resulted in you being here. Yeah. And then newer friends, some of whom we had a conversation earlier today. So my job is to talk about Food Solutions New England and answer some questions that Catherine posed in my own circuitous way. And so what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit first about my role as a Executive Director of a Sustainability Institute, because sustainability is the frame and the context in which I'm doing food work. That's a rock band that follows me wherever I go.
Great.
That was all right.
It's the theme song that was supposed to happen.
It's a good one, Tom.
So I want to spend a little bit of time on that, just to understand the context. I don't come from a food system expert place. And so I want to speak to that a little bit, and then I want to share a little bit about how the food system work has manifest at UNH, a fellow land-grant institution with all of the great and challenging things that come with higher education institutions, and then spend the bulk of the time on Food Solutions New England, the 6-state network piece of work that we're doing. So, Rich, I grabbed the web page here as an opening slide. I thought that would be good. So, sustainability, particularly sustainability in higher ed. So, what I'm trying to convey in this image here is there's a tendency to take what is historically a very large, complex, encompassing concept, set of commitments and principles, and shrink it to a convenient size that it can be plugged into existing paradigms, existing institutional structures, existing structures of knowledge and practice, and in the process actually diverge from what it is about. So what I want to underscore here is that the work, and I should say here, this getting the cart ahead of the horse. So I'm the founding executive director of the Sustainability Institute at UNH, and I am in my 22nd year in that capacity. And that's an endowed university-wide program in sustainability. So It's either the first or one of the earliest university-wide programs of its kind. So there's a lot of battle scars that go with this, and a lot of joy as well. So the thing that I want to emphasize is I was hired to bring sustainability into the fabric of the institution, and really to become a driver of transformation of the institution, although not everyone is open to that. But the point I want to underscore here is it's this concept of sustainability that does not fit on the screen that is the concept of sustainability that we're working with. So it's inherently non-conforming and disruptive. It's the term of art these days. And it's not something any one person or group can do. It's really, it implicates a complete transformation and reconfiguration in many cases. So that's the big thing. And here is an image I like to use just to underscore what I'm sure many of you have experienced, that sustainability is about a lot more than just the environment and environmental science. And so this image is, with the fence running down it, is an artifact of really the environmental movement at the 1960s to 1970 in the US, which created the Environmental Protection Agency, Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act. And this fence is here to protect fragile dune ecosystems on the right side of the image, nesting habitat for endangered species and the like, all very important for sustainability. But sustainability itself is about this side of the image. It's fundamentally a cultural set of questions, enduring questions about how do we define the good life, how do we organize the good life in institutions, and how do we sustain that good life in a way that is respectful both of previous generations and future generations. And so it's really a cultural question of identity and meaning. So that's part of what's important. So our work, in order to approach it this way, we rhetorically shifted from what is sustainability, which in many cases elicits a response that's kind of a variation on one little segment of the Brundtland Commission report of meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. And even that definition is just a fragment of the larger one. So we shifted the question to ask, what is it that sustains us as human communities? And by sustain, we don't mean merely survive, but how do we flourish as cultural beings and cultural communities within a larger community of beings and life in the Earth system? And so we have found that to be helpful way to break out of a narrow definitional response and more to be thinking about what is it? What are the elements? What's the fabric that can sustain flourishing of human communities, recognizing that there are complex cultural communities and in diverse ways, not a single uniform way of flourishing, but diverse ways of flourishing. This I obviously and blessedly I'm not going to go through, but this is just an image to underscore the history, or the contemporary history at least, of where sustainability came from, and it's kind of starting arbitrarily at 1970 and limits to growth, and then by the mid-80s, the Brundtland Commission, Our Common Future, the Rio Earth Summit of '92, that was followed on 2002 in Johannesburg, and then the 20 years out Summit of 2015. Within there, we've had the Millennium Development Goals, the Paris Agreement of 2015, the Financing for Development. There's a cluster of things here with 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals. But the thing I want to underscore here is the World Food Summit of 1996 and the commitment to making food security a human right as a central element of this international scientific and policy framework that was evolving through the 1990s. So now we have the Sustainable Development Goals that were established or adopted in September 2015. they're the next step from the Millennium Development Goals. By and large, they're seen as a great improvement over the Millennium Development Goals. And of course, importantly, they are not to be seen as discrete, one-off kinds of things that you might relate to one piece of, but in fact, they constitute a framework or a paradigm that has to be addressed in an integrated fashion, because it's really envisioning and calling for, again, a fundamental reorganization of societies and many of the institutions within society. The words can sound very approachable and easy, but when you really reflect on the implications of all of these being realized, you're talking about a transformation of economic systems, social systems, and the like. And of course, a central piece of that is this partnership element. And so that is a big part of the network efforts that we have underway. It relates to the Center for Regional Food Systems. Here, it's kind of the way we have to work to do this work, and it's got its own sets of challenges. These all form part of what is called the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, which incorporates biodiversity, climate. This is the Social Floors Project, a very interesting project that the International Labor Organization is kind of administering or running about social protections, universal social protections. The Sendai Framework on Risk Reduction is talking about resilience and financing for development, I already mentioned. And I will say, we were talking a little bit earlier, in Paris, I don't know if everyone has seen the special report that just came out a few weeks ago from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change on 1.5C. It was requested by the Paris Agreement, which was talking about aspirationally something under 2 degrees C change. And so the island nations actually requested a more detailed report on what's the difference between 1.5 and 2. And it turns out the differences are dramatic. And the urgency that's underscored in that report is that by 2030, 12 years, we need to make dramatic changes in our energy system, 45% reduction from 2010 goal emissions baselines, and that would require, will require a radical transformation of our energy systems, and the goal is to get to a kind of net zero by 2050. And that's to try to stay in 1.5. And we're currently on a trajectory that's, for some people, at 3, and for others at 4 degrees C change. And talk about disruption to food systems. Yeah. So anyway, that's part of the context. The way we pulled this down to the ground for this work at the University of New Hampshire is to see sustainability at the intersection of these 4 overlapping either systems or areas of climate and energy, biodiversity and food and ecosystems, food systems, and culture. And so the key here is that food, as we have both understood and pursued this work, is a structural piece of sustainability, non-negotiable. You can't have sustainability without a sustainable food system, and ultimately you can't have a sustainable food system without all these other elements factoring in. And then to bring it down to the ground at the university, we will work across what we call the core, which is curriculum. Beneath this is operations, research, and engagement. So those are the functional areas that we're working on. So I'll spend a little time talking about how food has manifested across this core, just to give you a sense of what have we done in our own house. And I should keep an eye on the time, which goes to when? Sorry.
12:15.
12:15, okay. And this is just to say, so we've undertaken this work. We published a book in 2009 that looked back over the first 10 years of the effort. And so it was written by more than 60 faculty and staff from UNH. And you know, in its genre, let's say, it's been a good seller. Anyway, it's interesting, and you may want to take a look at it at some time. But the idea is the sustainable learning community is sort of the aspirational goal of all of this stuff coming together pan-university in an integrated, coherent way. Okay, oh yeah, and we talked about this upstairs. So STARS, which is the Sustainability Tracking, Assessment and Ranking System that the National Association administers, is a ranking process, and we recently became one of 4 universities that have platinum for that. It doesn't want me to linger on this. But anyway, that's interesting. It's not enough, but it was a good rallying call for the campus and the like. Okay, so now what I want to do is kind of zip through a bunch of examples of concrete things that we've done within this framework on campus. So in 2003, we started the New Hampshire Farm to School program and co-hosted actually the first regional meeting with Cornell on Farm to School. This is, oh, you can't see the date, but that's the next year, the Student Organic Garden Club was established on campus, and we certified the first square inches of organic land on the campus. Since 2004, working with our dining systems on a local harvest initiative, procurement, nutrition, all aspects of the food system, and now setting some targets around procurement with definitions of local and regional and the like. They've been fantastic partners. 2005, we established the first organic dairy research farm at a university in the country. And as we were talking earlier, dairy in New Hampshire and New England has been just continually devastated. So many of the family farms are dairy in New England. And in fact, some 75% of the agricultural land in New England is stewarded by small-scale family dairy farms. And we are home to Stonyfield Farms in New Hampshire. And at this time, there was not a single organic dairy in the state of New Hampshire. And yet they were in urgent need of economic strategies that could find a way to survive. So this was an interesting project and is still up and running. And in fact, is now more of a agro-ecosystem study platform. 2006, we brought Carlo Petrini to honor his work in Slow Food International, gave him an honorary degree on campus, and then convened faculty and staff from across campus for a conversation that led to the establishment of a dual degree in eco-gastronomy. I don't know where that is, so I'll go back. I think it comes up after it was approved. So that took a couple of years. So in 2006, the idea was agreed to by a core group of people, and then subsequently that did happen. We also then spent a couple of years running workshops, bringing faculty and staff together from across campus. We had the vestiges of an older agricultural model where it was animal scientists, plant scientists, and agronomists. There were no agronomists left on the campus, so we had a kind of smattering of fragmentary leftovers, in a manner of speaking. So this was an effort to really transition and embrace an agro-ecosystem framework, because we had very strong applied ecology on the campus, but they had not been involved in food systems or agro ecosystems. So that was a big part of that effort. That led to what turned out to be a 9-year SARE-funded program that John Aber led, using the organic dairy as an agro-ecosystem study site. And John had spent his career as a nitrogen guy working in forests, and kind of moved over into the agroecological side of things, and it's just turned out to do some great stuff. That finally led to this Farming for the Future, and I include this because what I neglected to mention is back when this all started in the late 90s, there was a mindset that was quite prevalent, not just on our campus, but on our campus, that we were post-agriculture, that agriculture was an antiquated thing of the past, and that it was time to move away from that and embrace other more modern things, and that the practical implications of that were not replacing positions as people retired in extension and in agronomy and in all of these other related areas. Of course, from 2018 perspective, it's hard to imagine that, but it was real. And it was divesting, and some of our farms were kind of not operating, they were just sitting there. And so by 2008, there was a complete turnaround in that, and now we were talking about farming for the future, that this was a future-oriented thing that one could aspire to. And then that ultimately led to a cluster hire, which for UNH was a very large cluster hire in a college that had for more than 6 years not had the budget to do any tenure track hires. And so this was looking at sustainable ecosystem management and sustainable agriculture. So it was a big investment for the College of Life Science and Agriculture, and enhanced the capacity for teaching and research around agroecosystem studies. Then by 2010, we established a an undergraduate major in sustainable agriculture and food systems. So for some reason, my slides don't include the eco-gastronomy program, so I'll just say that was established, it was approved in 2008, and that is a dual major, which at UNH is much more than a minor, but it's not a double major. It's kind of its own thing in there. And you can't major in a dual major. You have to have a primary major, and then you can have a dual major. So eco-gastronomy is integrating sustainable agriculture, cuisine, food entrepreneurship, and nutrition. So taking those three areas and integrating them together in a cross-cutting curriculum. And the like. And so there's over 100 students majoring in that, or dual majoring in that now. And then by 2010, College of Life Science and Agriculture has a major in sustainable ag and food systems. So that's part of what's happened on campus. And then in 2017, a new department was formed in agriculture, nutrition, and food systems. So again, food systems, for it to be in a departmental name is a big development. And it also creates a very important context and foundation for connecting to this network work I'm going to talk about now. So networks connecting to change the world. Networks is where sustainability and systems can come together. This is essentially the framework that we use over and over in all of the convening that we've done to connect, build connectivity, and by that we're talking about trust, primarily, familiarity and trust across disparate groups on and beyond the campus. And for us, trust is the lifeblood of collaboration, and the more you can build it, the richer the collaboration. And then alignment around both values and priorities. That if you're connected and have the trust, it's much easier to work towards those. And then that can support concerted action, collective action, or the famous collective impact that is often referred to. And of course, this is it's an ongoing process. So that's shaped a lot of what we're going to talk about. I just want to mention briefly, in addition to being the backbone organization, as the term is, for Food Solutions New England, we're also the backbone organization for the New Hampshire Food Alliance, which is a state food system network that started in 2013. Okay, so Food Solutions New England is organized to transform New England's food system in a collaborative way. That's 6 states of Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. And so it is a region that coheres to a certain degree coherently, historically, to a certain degree culturally. It's colonial, New England, on land that was largely from the Wabanaki Federation. and it notoriously does not work together, notwithstanding that history. So this is an effort to bring that together around food. So we'll zoom in on New England. There's Cape Cod. And we get to the 6-state region here, and importantly, I use this image because the fisheries are an integral part of this. And I don't know what the experience is here, but it is a constant effort, if not battle, to ensure that fisheries are an equal part of food systems work, and not just agriculture. There's a lot of reasons why they tend to drift apart. So that's been a big part of this. So we really came together and said, what can we do as a region, a 6-state region, that we can't do together separately in terms of the future of our food system. So that was the impulse behind what led to this. And so we've had some very steady long-term funders, anchor funders, and invariably people ask about impact. And so one of the ways we tried to respond to the impact was to say, okay, we want to look at thought leadership and network leadership. Those are two areas that we feel we've had an impact on. And we think that that's an important impact, and we want to figure out how can we convey that. And related to thought leadership is just the power of ideas. And to networks, the power of trust, as I mentioned, and the power of values informing ideas, and the power of alignment building on trust. So I want to zip through these to give you a sense of these. So one of the important things that came out, that has come out of this work, is something called the New England Food Vision. And that is about the future of food in New England with healthy food for all, sustainable farming and fishing, and thriving communities. So that's the kind of high level takeaway. And I want to go back to, because we held 6 food summits, annual food summits in New England. The first one was in March of 2011, that was held in New Hampshire. And Mike Ham was invited to come to that because we were aware of the Good Food Charter here in Michigan. And we wanted to hear from Mike kind of firsthand, how's that going, what's it all about, and everything else. It was great to have Mike there. We also invited Michael Dimmick from Roots of Change in California, who's also working on good food charters with some of the cities in California. And then we also had a colleague of ours, Brian Donahue, a historian and farmer, who had begun outlining what became the New England Food Vision, asking how much food could we produce if we wanted to here in a way that's ecologically sound and that honors a goal that had been set by the Wildlands and Woodlands report of New England that said New England should maintain 70% forest cover long term. And we're about 80% right now. So Mike, and then in the second summit in 2012, Rich came and spoke. So there's a nice connection here to Michigan State. So what I want to do is kind of take this idea of a vision and just share a little bit of how it has then gone out and seeded things. And so this is a philanthropy newsletter, and Kendall Foundation has been one of our core funders, picking it up and saying, here's an example of a foundation looking to transform the food system. This is a partner, the New England Grassroots Environment Fund, who we're doing deeper and deeper work with now going forward, who use the vision to help frame a lot of their work. They're in over 2/3 of the communities in New England. They have grantees and a network. This is the Sustainable Business Network that's based in Boston, and they talk about their vision, and then they say they do this by, and they endorse the New England Food Vision as part of how they work. The Northeast Sustainable Ag Working Group, which is bigger than New England, it's a 9-state network, has also been very embracing of the New England Food Vision. Resilience, a lot of resilience hubs and other things are popping up all over the place. And of course, food systems is a vital part of that. This is the National Center for Appropriate Technology and their agricultural piece. Again, a lot of the framing in New England is using the food vision. This is from Common Dreams, and I include it just because the idea is not that New England can feed itself. It's looking to produce 50%, up to 50% of our food by 2060. We currently produce roughly equivalent to 10% of our food. So the idea has never been food self-sufficiency within the region, although with everything that's happening, we do have, there's a scenario in the food vision that pushes that number up called regional reliance, which is if there's disruptions that make it so, then we'll have to figure it out. This is University of Southern Maine, which has now started a new food program and been very active. This is from the Concord Monitor in New Hampshire that came to a summit. This is an image I'll say more about in a minute, but New England Food Summit, Inclusion and Dignity for All. Later this afternoon, we're going to talk about equity in the food system. That's a central part of the work that we do. This is from the Boston Globe. New England deserves a regional food plan. This is a TV news, Food Sustainability and the Future of Food. This is a newspaper from Providence, Rhode Island, where culinary students are referencing the 50 by 60 food vision. This is UMass Group looking at how can New England produce 50% of its food by then. This is a terrible slide, but it's basically showing that there are researchers on the UNH campus that are submitting NSF and other kinds of proposals using the food vision as a context. And this is Farm to Institution New England that's working on farm to school, farm to hospital, farm to institution, everything. They're also explicitly referencing, and they're an active part of the network. The food vision, the state of Rhode Island issued last year its Rhode Island food strategy, and it's talking a regional goal of 50% by 2060. So again, explicitly incorporating that in. This is our colleague Amanda Beal, who was one of the co-authors on the vision, and she has now become the president of Maine Farmland Trust. So the vision is being propelled across Maine, and there's a lot of implications for Maine in terms of land base within this vision. And then most recently, the Kendall Foundation has launched the New England Food Vision Prize, where they're working with the 210 colleges and universities in the region to use the vision as a context for figuring out how to procure more and more food from the region. So those are just some of the examples how an idea that in its early stages could be easily dismissed by those that don't see it as tangible enough, but ideas do matter. And it'd be interesting to see how the food charter here has kind of burrowed its way into different institutions and changed the discourse, really, where just like the future of farming, now it's legit, not universally, but to talk about the idea of like, wow, well, could we do this? And what would it take? And what would that look like? And the like. So it has shifted the conversation in many ways. So then in terms of network stuff, as I mentioned, we've had 6 regional summits with over 800 delegates. We ran a delegation model. So it wasn't just a conference, an open conference, but more we asked for delegations from each of the states, and then we had cross-cutting delegates. And then we moved them around the region, so there was one in each state. So this is a network team, roughly analogous to the steering committee, do you call it? Mm-hmm. So this is a little bit older picture, but this network team is now about almost 40 people from around the region that meet roughly 4 times a year to help hold the network together and move things forward. All 6 New England states now have state-based food system planning efforts. Ellen Kaler was here with the Vermont Farm to Plate, which many feel is the Cadillac of, that's probably the wrong adjective, but anyway.
This is Michigan.
Yeah, right.
They used to make Cadillacs.
That's right, yes, so it is the Cadillac of state food system efforts. But the point is, there's now one in every state, and they are communicating through the network generally, but then also Ellen has been leading a community of practice of all the backbone organizations across those states. So we've got, because it's New England, you got to have state-based planning, but then there's a dialogue with the regional food vision and the regional efforts. We also, in this delegation model, we started to add things in. So a couple of things happened. In 2013, at the end of our summit then, we made a public commitment to put racial equity at the core of our work. We're a network that was largely white people that started this. And so by the third summit, the end of the third summit, we said publicly, we are putting racial equity at the center of this, and the journey begins here proper, and we don't know how it's all going to be, but here we go. We also added a kind of emerging leaders cohort or delegation. This is Abel Luna, who works for Migrant Justice in Vermont, and he was one of those emerging leaders, and who stood up at the summit in 2014 and said, you know, we need to have food chain workers and farm workers' voices in this thing. And so he's been just a great leader. This is an emerging leader group that we supported. We found funding and had a kind of mini summit for them to come together from around the region. Then we established the what are called the ambassadors. This was part of the racial equity commitment. The three southern states of New England, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, are by far the most diverse. Northern New England is 97 to 99% white. So funding-wise, we could support three ambassadors. So this is Marilyn Moore, who's now a state senator, just was elected for the third time in Connecticut. Karen Spiller and Julius Kolawale, who runs the African Alliance in Rhode Island, and Karen is Boston-based. And so we support them to be ambassadors and to go out into communities and groups to talk about what people's aspirations are around the food vision, around their food vision, and in particularly, how can we be more inclusive as this work continues. So one of the things that they did, this was the Food Chain Workers Alliance the following year at the Boston Summit, and some of the organizations that were represented in that. We also started something called the 21-Day Racial Equity Challenge, and that this April will be, it's the fifth running of that 21-Day Racial Equity Challenge. And that is based on the kind of Eddie Moore and the woman who wrote Waking Up White, just blanking on her name, but anyway, there was work done generally around this habit building challenge of if you do something for 21 days straight, you can change a habit. So we reached out and said, would you be open to us adapting this for the food system context? And they were thrilled. And so that began, and the first year we had some 200 people sign up. It's 21 days, you receive daily prompts, and there's moderated discussion on a website around that. Last year, the fourth year, we had over 3,000 people sign up from all over the country, and actually some from beyond the country. And we think that number is low, that there are people signing up on behalf of organizations or units and the like. So the fifth annual is coming up, and we've got a big push going on for that. But that's been a really important part of our work, and one that we have gotten feedback through surveys across the network that's very highly valued. And the respondents to those surveys are largely white. So it's white people who are finding this value, and the way the prompts are organized are dealing not just with structural racism, but with white privilege and white supremacy and the culture of white supremacy. And so just dealing with whiteness, which is such a central element to this, this has been a very helpful tool to do that. Then the other thing that the ambassadors did is they recruited people that they identified who were playing leadership roles in their communities to come to the summits as a delegation. And so our sixth summit was in Bridgeport, Connecticut. And so these are some images from that. This is Marilyn Moore, who's the state senator from Bridgeport. But we held it in Bridgeport as part of our commitment to racial equity. And so it was the most diverse gathering that we had. And so this is a quote from Marilyn. It's in white writing, I apologize. But basically what she's saying is, she's talking about what happened as a result of that convening. And she said, this family did not exist before. Everyone was doing things individually. She's talking about in the city of Bridgeport. And she said, but now they're mobilized and working together, moving Bridgeport Food Policy Council along. They've asked me, Marilyn, to be an advisor, where before I couldn't even get a seat at the table. 4 people who were at the summit are now on the Food Policy Council, and now the council is making stuff happen. So I point that out just to say the power of convening and connecting people. You never know what the ripple effect is going to be. And so this was a great example of some of the conversations. So then I want to very quickly then get to the end here. So part of what we did along the way is we did a systems mapping exercise that lasted for 10 months. And we were identifying ultimately leverage areas around which we could organize our collective work as a network. And so this is an early rendering of what was coming out of that. And I want to highlight democratic empowerment, a new food story or narrative, and ecological, equitable, vibrant economies, essentially like sustainable food economies. And so these were 3 things that surfaced. And I was talking earlier with Catherine and Rich about how this was the first time that political language broke through. And it was really important because it was not just systems speak that can be a little sanitized and filter out politics. This was saying that democratic empowerment is a key issue here. The narrative piece is huge, and of course, how do you create truly sustainable economies? So that was then rendered into this somewhat loved and somewhat hated rendering around the food vision, which is just trying to present it as a path that we can go down together with all these different elements of mobilizing leaders and dignity for all and the food system and the like. So I won't go into the details of that. The other thing that developed along the way was we had an opportunity to establish a Network Leadership Institute, which has turned out to be a very powerful vehicle for recruiting leaders, food system leaders, into the Food Solutions New England network, and providing capacity building, essentially, in network leadership. And Vanessa was in the second cohort of that. This is an image of the first cohort. It's just amazing the talent that is out there and the passion that is out there. It's really remarkable. We came together to articulate our values, which had been somewhat articulated in the vision and somewhat implicit. And so this was an exercise that we went through to just call them out and put them on the site. So democratic empowerment, which is really celebrating the value and political power of people. It's this identity that's more than a consumer. It's not just consumers who vote with their dollars, that people have political agency. And that's an important part of what's got to be brought to bear. Racial equity and dignity for all, sustainability in this broad sense that I've talked about it, and trust. So those are the core values that are guiding this network. The structure of the network is, there's the backbone team, which is at UNH Sustainability Institute, a core team that's about an additional 8 people that we meet on a monthly basis to just check in on everything that's going on. The ambassadors I mentioned here. The network team I mentioned is meeting about 4 times a year, about now close to 40 people. Then we've had strategy teams and also project teams that are now underway, connecting out with the broader community. So that's the structure. And then this is just layering on all those different pieces. This is a Curtis slide. That's kind of just saying these structures are there. This is the 21-day challenge, the Network Leadership Institute, the ambassadors. The strategy teams have now morphed into project teams. And so it's keeping all of those things connected as this whole thing kind of rolls along. So we've had more than 25 network team meetings in 1 to 2 days, 36 core team meetings, 35 summit steering committee meetings, more than 200 backbone team meetings, 6 regional summits with 800 delegates. The ambassadors have convened 6 meetings, 2, we're now in our 3rd network leadership. We've raised probably more than $2 million to support that work. And I should say a significant in-kind piece of that is from the Sustainability Institute. So it wouldn't be working without that in-kind piece that we provide. We've written an article on equity as common cause. This is in the journal Othering and Belonging, which is out of the Haas Institute at UC Berkeley, and that's just the story of the racial equity commitment. We have struggled in terms of being able to connect and sustain connection with the indigenous communities of New England. And last August, a team of us attended an intertribal food sovereignty summit in Connecticut and went as listeners and learners. And there's some really great work going on in the tribal communities. And so we're following up on that to find out the best way to find what's meaningful and of value to their work in our work and vice versa, and how we can build that. So that's an ongoing effort. So I'm going to just jump to, I did want to say this. My friend Lisa Fernandez showed me that as we're working on the new narrative, I should say the new narrative, the idea is using this George Lakoff Frameworks Institute, deep frames, not just messaging, but really getting at these underlying frames that color so much of what people hear and how they process information, and then speaking directly to values and coming up with narrative strategies. So we're right in the midst of that work now, and that could be a whole session unto itself. But Lisa, who's kind of the point person on that work, used this to underscore, it isn't about the data. In so many of the cases, it's not that data isn't important, but it's not what moves the majority of people. And so it's really coming up with these alternative frames and narratives, and then that can lead to messaging. We're working on the state of the New England food system. As we were talking earlier, the idea here is some kind of high-level dashboardy kind of thing. We haven't figured it out yet, but that speaks to all people in New England. So this is not for policymakers. It's not for researchers in any exclusive way. It is for all New Englanders. And we don't know if the thing is even possible, but we believe there's got to be some way to do this. And so we're having ongoing meetings and about that, connecting with more and more people. And we think that the new narrative, as that gets more refined over the next 6 months, that's going to help inform the kinds of things that the state of the system could be capturing and conveying. So it's, the goal is if you're going to mobilize people democratically, for example, the more that you build a shared understanding of the system broadly across all of the people of the region, the more empowering that can be, or more people can build power around that, I should say. And then we've got a group working on a New England farm, fisheries and food. It says here bill, but it's kind of a platform, simply trying to identify what are the federal, state, and local policy pathways that can help advance the vision and values that the network is all about. And we're envisioning, this is really a little bit on the back burner, but something like a people's guide to the New England Food Vision, sort of using Indivisible, for those that are familiar with that. And again, we don't want nobody wants a policy document sitting on a website somewhere, but instead, how can it be a tool to help mobilize people to engage, not just with their dollars, but with their political agency. So that is currently the work. And then ongoing strategic convening, top kind of priority issues include still the New England dairies, fisheries, and the like, but we see the network's role is to continually be doing strategic convening around critical issues that aren't being convened by others. And so this is, of course, the Venn diagram where all of this stuff is to be undertaken in an integrated way and not break off into separate things that are being undertaken. So that's where we are right now. These groups are all at work. The new narrative is we hired a full-time communications director for that, and are completing a consultant work with us over a year, the Hathaway Consulting, on this deep frames. So essentially right now they are testing some of the narrative frames that have come out of the work, and we're waiting for that kind of testing to come back to help take us to the next step. So I think that's, oh, this is just a final network piece. Well, no, actually, I'm just going to go to the blank slide. Yep.
Yeah, right. And like, we do have a question?
Yep, there's one question from Michael Dahl. What policy issues have been identified to set the environment needed to achieve 50 by 60?
What policy
Issues
have
been identified?
I would say to date
Can we just repeat that question?
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
So what, yeah, just for the microphone.
So what policy issues have been identified to set the environment needed to achieve 50 by 60?
Yeah, I would say there's not a refined set of policy issues. There are policy issues that are bubbling up from state level efforts and local efforts, and they include everything from harmonizing regulations to be able to distribute and sell food across the 6 New England states, because there are barriers to that. There have been significant barriers, believe it or not, to sell locally caught fish, for example, in the state of Massachusetts. So the New England fisheries are characterized now by essentially 90% of what is landed in New England fisheries is exported, and about 90% of what is consumed in New England is imported. And so it's the vision and the work that this network is doing wants to see that dramatically altered, because the structure of the fishing industry based on the 90% export is not about small-scale family fishing. It's about consolidation and privatization of the oceans and the like. So that's another issue that has come up. There's tons of issues around food security, food access, and nutrition, education. So it's a bit of a cacophony right now of policy issues, and part of the work of this food policy pathway effort is in fact to start to cohere that and to see if we can prioritize some things, for example, around Farm Bill and state legislation and local legislation, but also, and I don't know if the question includes this, institutional policies. So the farm to institution work, healthcare without harm, we talked about earlier, all of the issues around procurement in farm to institution, farm to hospital, farm to school, and the like. There's a whole myriad of issues related to that. So those are some of the things, but I want to say that the racial equity piece, when we first announced that, we had a surprising number of people say, what does that have to do with food? Seriously. I mean, really smart people who had just defined the food system in a way that extrapolated away from that. And so the question started to move to, well, who has access not just to food, but to land, to fishing rights, to capital, to technical assistance. There's a whole range of issues and policies around that. So, so I would say stay tuned in terms of a nice tight set of things. But for now, it's still a kind of chaotic landscape.
Any other questions, Sarah, right now? In the room? That's it?
I have one. You talk a lot about the power of convening, and I think all of us who do this work in our various spaces experience that power. But something like over the past year or two in my previous work, which is connected to our work here, I've had a lot of conversations about how funders just don't want to fund that. They don't want to fund a bunch of meetings. And I'm curious to know what you've done to sort of educate funders, or if you've just magically found funders who get it. Or we can talk a little bit about
Yeah,
I'm just gonna repeat the question.
Yeah,
for
sure,
our
sure.
Zoom
How to
audience.
communicate-
So, no, I'm gonna say.
Oh, you're gonna do it, okay.
Sorry.
That's okay. Go for it.
So the succinct version, how do we educate our funders on the importance of convening so that they support the convening work?
Yeah, and well, so we've been fortunate to have the Kendall Foundation has been an anchor funder of ours, and they've just gotten it from the start. In fact, they had a program officer who's no longer there, Courtney Borns, who had a background in networks, and so she came to our second summit, and then there was a follow-up meeting. Actually, after our first summit, that I spoke at and Ellen Kaler spoke at, because when we had our first summit in 2011, that was less than a year after Farm to Plate was established. So Ellen brought a delegation from Vermont. So Ellen was on a panel actually with Mike and Michael as well. And so we spoke, and it was to a group of funders in Maine who said, we want Maine to have a food plan strategy. So anyway, so Courtney Borns ended up playing an important role, and Andy Kendall, in saying we get the value of this convening thing and network building, as long as it's in service to building a network. And so that's been core. Then there have been other funders who have slowly had confidence, the more we've done it, to come in. And I would say one of the, I can't even say it's a strategy, but it's a practice, is we've engaged as many of them as possible in participating in it. So not the arm's length kind of thing, but join the process team, join the network team, join the summit steering and design committee, and roll up your sleeves next to everybody else. And that's been, I think, really beneficial to see and feel and experience that what happens. Now, that being said, their boards continue to ask, well, we've been funding this for 6 years, like what's happening? And that's where we went through this exercise of thought leadership and network leadership as one way to try to get at conveying the value. But it continues to be an uphill battle. But I'd say when we've found funders that do value it, then they can help as ambassadors to other funders. And so that's the way it's happened. But there's a parallel track to that question, I think, in academia, as we were talking upstairs earlier, where is this kind of work valued in academic departments and other sorts of things? And it's not valued enough in my experience. But it holds tremendous promise for transdisciplinary science that's on the end of the spectrum that views sustainability as social change. And it's a process of social change. And once you kind of break through into that, then this networked approach is key, actually, to doing the work.
Thank you.
All right, maybe one more question. Are there any on Zoom? No. Okay, go ahead, Rich.
So, Tom, could you give us some idea of the involvement of state government in FSNE outside of Vermont? We've had Ellen here. We know they drove. They're very involved. They put in money. You know, the program. The Ellen is part of that. Could you just say anything about sort of the range of how state government has played a role in the other 5 states?
And before you start, for the benefit of the Zoom audience, the question is about the role of state government in this work, particularly outside of Vermont.
Outside of Vermont.
So it's a full range from Vermont, and you know, Vermont's Sustainable Jobs Fund is a quasi-governmental entity. So we could say New Hampshire, almost none, and that's New Hampshire. They
live free or die.
Live free or die. In fact, there was a bill partially inspired by Farm to Plate that was in the legislature, and even with no funding attached to it, could not get passed. But it's there. It's there. But we work with some state entities like the Department of Ag and the like. But in terms of legislature and that kind of policy and funding, there's nothing there. If you go to Rhode Island, as I shared there, the governor has created a position of food systems, and there our colleagues Campaign and many others who are central members of the network have worked with others, and it's now an integral part of their economic development planning. They have incorporated the racial equity piece into that, and now there are policies and funding being developed. It's still at a modest scale, but a lot of the pieces are in place there. Now, anything that's established that way, of course, you get a significant change of administration, and that can change. So that's after Vermont. I'd say Rhode Island probably is the most robust. Then in terms of Connecticut, it's Steve Bravitsky, who's the outgoing commissioner of Ag, has been active. There's kind of a parallel effort going on in Connecticut between the state out of Steve's office, and then there's a Connecticut Food System Alliance. And there's been a lot of policy in Connecticut around agriculture, positive policy, but it hasn't been, other than Steve's participation, hasn't been directly connected to the network. And then Massachusetts, their state level planning puts a pretty high priority on identifying what's coming up in the legislature and trying to work with legislators to get at that. But again, nothing like Vermont. And Maine has gone through quite a dry spell under the current governor. And but that's changing now after the election. So it's been minimal up to now. But part of what we're trying to do, Rich, with this farm, food, and fish policy platform is start to hone in on what are the policy pathways and can we successfully mobilize this growing network to move those things forward.
Thank you.
All right, we're gonna leave it there for now. Those of you in the room, welcome to keep talking over lunch, but we're gonna say goodbye to our Zoom friends now. Big thank you first to Gwen for helping with technology, and Jennifer for coordinating logistics. Very thank you. And to Tom for flying all the way down to Michigan to join us today.
Yeah, thanks, Snow.
And just a reminder, we will send out the recording as soon as that's available, and we have the recording from the first 2 seminars already up on our website.
Wonderful.